And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. We are indeed at a time where we come to Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing louder calls to resign, as ITV revealed just hours ago that he allegedly attended a birthday party for him in June 2020, organised by his wife, despite strict COVID lockdown rules that banned indoor gatherings. Downing Street admits that Johnson joined some 30 people in the cabinet room, but insists that he was there for about 10 minutes and that he didn't hold another bash later at his residence, as also reported by ITV. Despite the continuing Partygate revelations, Mr Johnson is refusing to budge from number 10. In protest, one MP crossed the floor of the Commons, defecting to the main opposition Labour Party. A former cabinet minister told him, "In the name of God, go." Well, he's had the devil's luck in riding out scandals before, but can he survive this time around? We discussed the latest developments today with Dr. Matthew Flinders, Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Sheffield, and Dr. Ben Wellings, Head of Politics and International Relations at Monash University. Very warm welcome to you both. Now, well, starting with you, Professor Flinders. Now, recent polls are suggesting that 6 in 10 British voters think that Mr Johnson should resign. And the poll by YouGov for The Times, conducted before the PM's apology, suggests that Labour support is currently 10 percentage points ahead of the Conservatives. So right now, especially with this whole birthday bash revelation, what is the public mood over Partygate? And is Labour right now at an advantage?
Certainly, the public mood is angry, it's furious. It comes on a wider sort of bed of resentment and concern about the behaviour of politicians. And so the fact that when COVID was in and people had to lock down very severely, the idea that politicians and those who make the rules were themselves partying has hit the public very hard indeed. I think it's also worth saying that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, hasn't done a very good job in trying to explain to the public or face up to what he may or may not have done, even declaring in the House of Commons that he might have gone to a party, but he didn't realise it was a party. And this has just made the public more and more angry and disgruntled, not just with Boris Johnson, but I think more generally with politicians broadly.
And well, let's bring you into the conversation, Professor Wellings. Now, as most polls do show that 6 in 10 British voters think that the Prime Minister needs to resign, it's been shown that 42% are actually those who voted for the Conservatives at the 2019 election. And also 40% of Tory grassroots voters want Mr Johnson out. That means the other 60% or so, that means a large number of people really still back the Prime Minister or don't think that the damage has been substantial to call for a resignation. How should we really interpret these kind of figures?
Well, thanks, Soo-young. I think interpret them in the light of Matthew's comments about low expectations of politicians, which is a very damaging trust in politics and possibly in democracy more broadly. But I think the point to focus on is the lack of support or the weakening support that Johnson seems to be getting from the 29 intake of members of Parliament. And you might remember that this was a kind of the election that was supposed to get Brexit done. And a very historic win that seemed to come on the back of voters switching from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party. Now, those MPs who won in those circumstances might be feeling very vulnerable because if these voters could switch allegiance, their allegiance may not be all that deep, and there's nothing to prevent them from switching back again and restoring a lot of votes to the opposition centre-left Labour Party. So I think that's where some of the vulnerability within the Conservative MPs at Westminster lies, and I think that will be focusing a lot of those MPs' minds in terms of when the report comes out, the official civil service report comes out, then we may start to see the actions triggered, the letters going to a particular committee that will then trigger a leadership contest.
Right, and the investigation is ongoing, and Professor Flinders, the second Permanent Cabinet Secretary, Sue Gray, she's been looking into this and will be submitting the results this week. How has Ms Gray been conducting the probe, and is she going to make a judgment based on her findings? What will the impact of her report be, do you think?
Well, I know Sue Gray. I know her very well. I've known her for many decades. What's interesting is that Sue Gray is hugely respected within the civil service. She is not somebody who's going to be swayed by any influence. She's not within the Prime Minister's inner set. She is known as a very straight-talking woman of the highest standards. So Sue Gray, funnily enough, her report, she has no real formal power at all. Her report will be made to the Prime Minister. Now, that sounds a bit odd, given that the Prime Minister is at the focus of the complaints. Why the report really matters is that, as Ben Wellings just said, Boris Johnson does not have the support of his backbenchers. Even those that haven't yet come out against him are teetering on the edge of giving up on him. So Sue Gray's report will be critical, because that will contain the evidence on which a real judgment can be made about how truthful the Prime Minister has been. What's important on that is actually bigger. Sue Gray's report about parties isn't really about parties. Actually, what's happened is the Partygate scandal has become more of a lightning rod for long-term issues about a lack of trust in Boris Johnson. And that's the bigger question here. Can Boris Johnson's backbenchers trust him, and can the British public trust him? For a long time, he was seen as a celebrity politician. He was a positive asset for the Conservative Party. It looks as if that Teflon status may well have gone.
Well, Boris Johnson has been known for his big, huge personality, and well, Professor Wellings, you said that Mr Johnson came to power on and has continued to ride the wave of the Brexit sentiment. His politics has really been all about defying conventions and norms, and he's gotten away with a lot of scandals in the past. What's made him so invincible until now?
Well, I think we can divide his prime ministership up into two broad periods, the Brexit period and the pandemic period. Now, they do overlap and intertwine, but I think that there was a lot of focus on him as a leader during the Brexit phase, and in particular the election of December 2019. And he was seen to be an unconventional figure who could break the political deadlock around Brexit, cut through the so-called delivery man. He would get things done. And I think then in the pandemic phase, there was a so-called rally round the flag effect, where people were shocked by the way that the pandemic was rolling out. And we saw this the world over. A lot of support for incumbent governments, trust in politics briefly went up, something that Johnson's leadership has now squandered, of course. You have to remember that Johnson's popularity was at his height when he was in hospital with COVID in April 2020. So I think that has to be interpreted as a kind of a sympathy vote. And the polling of his own personal popularity, given that his leadership is built so heavily on his personality, his character, his persona as the slightly disheveled person who will do things in an unconventional way and get away with things. I think that political capital has been expended, and he will soon reap the rewards of that, unfortunately.
And of course, he's relied on some loyalists in his party. And Professor Flinders, there have been rumours of bullying and blackmailing to keep the Conservative MPs from submitting their letters of no confidence. Do you think these rumours are true? And how much power does the pro-Boris faction have over the Conservative Party?
I think the pro-Boris faction is shrinking rapidly. I think even many of those who are still willing to stand up in public and support Boris are increasingly doing so with less and less conviction, and there are less and less people willing to go public to defend him. What's really interesting is the way in which the role of the whips, the party managers, has been so heavily criticised. Even now, having Conservative parliamentary chairmen themselves going to the police to complain about their government's behaviour. It's quite unbelievable. Parliament is a rough and tumble place, and I've no doubt that some rather Machiavellian things happen. But for the whips to have handled things so badly, what they've done in trying to protect Boris Johnson is actually push people away from the Prime Minister and burn up any political capital that he had left.
Well, Professor Wellings, to trigger a vote of no confidence, at least 15% of Tory MPs would have to write a letter to Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbenchers. Do you think they're going to be able to reach the 54 letters needed to meet that 15% quota?
Well, of course, that is the big question, and none of us can be sure about that. I mean, there are certain rumours that are being reported, and as Matthew has said, support for Johnson seems to be contracting. If we read those signs, he doesn't seem to have much support. So I think, again, it comes back to the vulnerable position of these, the new intake of MPs from the previous election in 2019, but also we need to keep an eye on what cabinet colleagues are saying or not saying, how emphatic their declarations of support are for him, and indeed whether they are people who owe their political career to him and his rise. So it won't just be Boris Johnson who goes if it does come to a leadership contest and he loses. There are certain ministers and advisors and so on, and people around him whose political careers will end or take a short break, depending on what comes afterwards. So I think it really does. We can't say for certain how many letters are ready to go or have already been sent, but 15%, given the current mood, is not a high threshold. So I suspect those people who do want a leadership contest are probably feeling quite confident at the moment.
And many, of course, are watching for the results of Sue Gray's report. And Professor Flinders, it seems that on the Prime Minister's part, he's pretty determined not to resign. What do you think is going through his mind? Do you think he's got a plan, or do you think he's going to try and bluff through this as he always has done?
Yes, sorry, I had to laugh when you suggested that he had a plan there. I mean, Boris, who I know, is an incredible politician. There's no doubt about it. He has a real gift of working with public audiences and entertaining and controlling the media. He is a very skillful politician. The big weakness, though, that everybody has always known about Boris is Boris. That he will make gaffes, he will make errors, he won't actually focus on the detail, he'll leave that to other people, and inevitably things catch up with him. And really, that's what's happened on this occasion. If you look back at Boris Johnson's whole life, through school, university, in journalism, his first period in Parliament, his time as Mayor of London, back in Parliament, he has built his reputation on somebody who never follows the normal conventional rules, who thinks he's above those rules and that he is special, entitled to behave in certain ways. And really, this is what's coming home to roost now. There's no surprise at all that the problems have occurred around Boris. Many people were just saying, how long would it be? And they're surprised it's taken this long. So the interesting other thing is, you talk about the 1922 committee and a challenge. A sign of the concern within the Conservative Party, the backbenchers, is there's now a move to reduce the period so that if there were to be a leadership competition now, and somehow Boris were to win, usually that would give a year's space before another leadership contest could be held. Such is the concern on the backbenchers that there's a move now to reduce that period to just 6 months. That is a real reflection on how worried people are about whether Boris Johnson has now become a serious liability for the Conservative Party. Of course, if you're a Labour politician, you've got a very big smile on your face at the moment.
And well, there certainly does seem to be speculation as well on who might be his replacement. And Professor Wellings, who would replace Mr Johnson if he steps down or is forced to go?
Well, This is a bit of a moving feast. I mean, I think when we started thinking about this, last week, that there were sort of a series of names that could have come up, but the more damage that there adheres to Boris Johnson, the more that kind of infects the people around him. So one of the names that would have mentioned would have been Priti Patel, but I think that she's the Interior Minister, the Home Secretary. But I think she's a little bit too close to Johnson, and I think she would struggle in a contest. Two obvious candidates are the Treasurer, the so-called Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and also the Foreign Minister, Liz Truss, who, given the current geopolitical climate on the Russia-Ukraine border, some people might think, well, she'd be well placed to step in and handle this because, will Johnson be really focused on this emerging military crisis if he's worried about, whether he's been involved in a party or not back in his residence. So the idea might be, well, we could remove Johnson, put Liz Truss in. But there are reasons that each of these candidates would not necessarily appeal to various grassroots or parliamentary MPs. And so it's not unknown in the history of leadership contests that an outsider comes up because they're the least objectionable candidate, and their day in politics arrives.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time now, but that was Dr. Matthew Flinders, Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Sheffield, and Dr. Ben Wellings, Head of Politics and International Relations at Monash University. Thank you both so much for your wonderful insights and your time.